Hello, good evening, and welcome to another exciting time to talk about business. Looking at business analysis from different angles. It is Business 101, and my name is Blyden Ukem. In Business 101 today, we'll look at the state of the economy of Nigeria, as Business 101 gives the basics of communication, basics of understanding regarding the world of business and intricacies of it. Well, we begin the conversation regarding the state of Nigeria's economy with an IMF report on Nigeria's economy, which shook the Nigerian community about incessant happenings that is likely to take place. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has cautioned that Nigeria's exchange rate might experience an additional 35% depreciation this year. This could lead to a massive surge in inflation, reaching a peak of 44% due to the absence of local production and the recent liberalization of commodity imports. The exchange rate is expected to undergo further depreciation. The bank disclosed this in its February 2024 post-financing assessment and staff reports. According to the report, this could lead to a massive surge in inflation, reaching a peak of 44% before monetary policy can effectively address the situation through tightening measures. The IMF stressed that the current level of monetary policy tightening is not adequate to reduce inflation to below 20% in Nigeria. Moreover, pressures on the Naira continues to persist. On Tuesday, the Nigerian Naira experienced further depreciation, reaching 1,900 Naira to the dollar in the parallel market. However, it recovered to 1,551 Naira per dollar at the Nigerian Autonomous Foreign Exchange Market, NAFEM. Many concerns from that angle. The Nigerian government recently revealed plans to address the currency challenges by seeking $10 billion in funding to boost liquidity in the foreign exchange market. The Bretton Woods institutions suggest that a country would gain from formulating a comprehensive macroeconomic and growth strategy in collaboration and with support from development partners. Even with these challenges, the IMF is optimistic that Nigeria will fulfill its repayment obligation to the fund, provided there is a continued focus on servicing external debts. The fund further predicted that a country's growth could fall to zero in 2024 and only slowly recover to 2% in 2028. And it builds a conversation from here how concerning it is. Prices are high. Inflation in Nigeria has gotten to 29.9%, just so close to 30%. And the IMF are saying high costs of commodities and weakness of the Naira could span to 44% of inflation in the coming years. And growth level at 2024 ending could span to just 0%, no increase, and by 2028 it could only increase to 2%. A big concerns there amid difficulties in the economy, amid the structure of the economy and the fight and the battling. Our people are hungry, our people are crying. Our prices of commodities are getting to a heightened level. How can Nigerians cope? And the big question would be, what is the fundamentals in the economy? What are governmental plans? What went wrong over time? A subsidy removal could be one of that concerns and one of that conversation. On the other hand, the attempt to peg the Naira at equal exchange rate, talking about the parallel market and the international exchange market, has been the concern. And we'll go on a short break. When we're back, the conversation builds up on the state of the economy. Important questions would be asked. What is the way forward? What was the problem? What is the solution? What are the government policies on ground? And how can this change the narrative for Nigerians? We'll go on that break. When we're back, I will be having conversations regarding this with my guests. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. It is Business 101, and my name is Blyden Ukem. Talking about the states of economy, the economy of Nigeria, and the consequences, the parameters of economic deficiency, one way or the other, is that conversation we're having today. We'll be looking at the critical moments. Where did Nigeria's economy fall by? That inflation in the country, it's at a heightened level of 29.9%. Naira to exchange in the exchange market against the US dollar has gotten to heightened level equally. At some point reached 1,850 Naira at the parallel market against the Naira, against the dollar rather. Big concerns, the pound. On the other hand, Naira against the pound has heightened beyond 2,000 point mark, and these are the concerns. For many Nigerians, when you talk about inflation, the conversation about inflation is all about heightened prices of commodities and the weakness in Naira. Things are so difficult. And let's x-ray these fine details and see what went wrong. What is the possible solution for the economy of Nigeria? My guest, Dr. Aliyu Elias, an economist, a specialist regarding the story of economists and economy and the strength of the Naira and moving forward, joins the conversation this evening. Dr. Aliyu, good to have you on the show. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Well, Dr. Aliyu, quite exciting to have you. I was anticipating this conversation so early. Our biggest of this conversation would be an x-ray into the state of the economy of Nigeria. Let me begin the conversation this way. When you look at Nigeria's economy at the moment, strikingly surprising for you, or not surprising because many people had anticipated this to happen, especially on this show, considering the fact that there was removal of subsidy when this administration came into power. Next up was the conversation about the state of the Naira, trying to peg the parallel market and the international exchange window at some point. Many debacles happening. Nigerians are crying. What do you make of the state of the economy?
Right. Thank you so much for having me. Basically, it is expected, but because it is an economy, I want to say economy is reactive, which is what you put in that you get outside. So I think the policy pronouncement on the day of inauguration of this new government have shown us that this is the direction the government is going. However, as an economist, we all actually canvass for removal of subsidy, but you recall that President Muhammad Buhari has putting up some plans before the removal of subsidy, but unfortunately, none of them has been materialized before this new administration removed fuel subsidy. The low-hanging fruit that should have been achieved is the fixing of our refinery, and I can assure you up to now, our refinery has not got fixed. And the second one is the issue of Naira floating. Show me a country in the world that will leave its Naira, its currency rather, to willing buyer and willing seller. Perhaps it's not that economy that actually have a productive, that is a productive economy. So I think we call for this, and this is it now. So there's urgent need to manage the state of the economy in India. So we are in challenge, and we just have to look for a solution. And it should not be okay if the present administration is also calling that the past administration. That is not good for this economy, because when you are inheriting an economy, you are inheriting the good and also the liability. So I think this government needs to do something urgent to address these challenges.
All right, good perspective from you. You said the challenges are there, the government needs to do something to address the challenges. But here's the concern. I began the show by talking about IMF report that came out recently, and the IMF report had picked and indicated that Nigeria's economy is getting worse and will get worse. And one of those conversations is that it's still expecting further depreciation of the Naira, but a heightened level of it worse. When the IMF report stated categorically that they're projecting that Nigeria's inflation rate will get to 44%. It's 29.9% now, and it's eating deep into Nigerians, and many people are suffering and trying to survive. Imagining it getting to 44%, you buy the same ideology of the IMF that is getting worse by the day.
Well, it is quite expected that it will keep moving on, because if you look at the cost of inflation is more of structural and inflation that has to do with, if you look at even the drivers of the inflation, you see that it's food and cost driven inflation. So such inflation, to address such inflation, a lot of things need to be fixed. And our insecurity also, it's also a problem, because people think there is no correlation between inflation and insecurity. But I tell them that inflation is a problem. You recall that even when this government came on board, they said they are declaring state of emergency on food security. But having said that, they are also canvassing for all-round farming. But for an economist like us, we also see it from the problem of supply chain, because supply chain is becoming much more issue to be addressed by this government, because it's not enough for farmers to produce. Even some of us are even saying that it is not that there is no food in Nigeria. The purchasing power is a problem, and how to take the food to where people will buy the food. Yeah, because if you look at food inflation record, Bauchi is performing actually a very fair. Because I think that's the least we have. Why Kogi is the highest. So you will now wonder, between Kogi and Bauchi, what is the problem? It's not the problem of supply chain. So it is not enough to have food produced in a particular place. It is also government's responsibility to find a way where the supply chain can move, where people that have less production can actually get the food. Then another issue is the issue of insecurity. Now, insecurity is a serious problem that is adding to our problem. So we must also tame such a problem. Then the purchasing power is another problem. Now, purchasing power is Nigeria's most problem. Now, it's not that you don't have money, but what can that money buy? And it's a courtesy of the floating of naira. So it's a myriad of problems that need to be tamed for government to really bring succor to the Nigerian citizen.
All right, we've talked about two indices now. One of it would be the purchasing power, because when you talk about inflation, most often than not, inflation depicts high prices of commodities. On the other hand, a weakening the currency of the country, working in tandem, and it's the case for Nigeria. Our first conversation, another area of the conversation I want to look at would be when you talked about food security. And now, inflation, food inflation in the country stands at a heightened level of 35.4%, as at the general report from the National Bureau of Statistics that came out, increasing from 33.9%. So you thinking one of the biggest marks of this food inflation, because everyone has to eat, is that of security, right? Because you mentioned security. But the other question would be now, when you look at production quota of Nigeria in terms of food, do you think Nigeria is able to sustain itself in terms of food production? Well, I'm presuming we're having some connections difficulties there. But Dr. Aliyu Elias had mentioned about food security as a big concern in the economy and the purchasing power that's happened within it. And one of those concerns was built around that of insecurity. Well, we're trying to get connection back to Dr. Aliyu in that regard. But insecurity becomes a big problem in the economy, because farmers have to go to farm, as he was saying, and on the other hand, they need the security within that context. But other concerns within the context also are built around the very conversation that if Nigeria is producing enough, because there's always going to be a battle of local production and a battle of importation of the commodities we use, and then the purchasing power in that regard. The concerns are there to talk about, and the identities of this concern are another build-up to look forward to. We'll try to see how to secure connection with Dr. Aliyu again regarding the conversation as time goes on. But one of the indices we have to look at in today's edition of Business 101 would be the identities that the Naira would be falling at 35%. Naira depreciation rates, according to IMF, the Naira would be falling at 35%. Important outlook also will be built around the impact of the absence of local production and the recent liberalization of the commodity imports. What the thoughts are regarding this rate exchange is expected to undergo further depreciation is making humongous concerns in Nigeria. Regarding this conversation also, Business 101 will look at the state of the economy, the impact of Nigeria's unemployment rate, as unemployment in Nigeria surges to 5% amidst rising cost of living in the country. We'll also hear that Nigeria's unemployment rate rose to 5% in the third quarter of 2023, up from 4.2%, bringing different concerns moving forward in the period we're talking about. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, in the third quarter of 2023, 75.6% of Nigeria's working age population were employed. And this aggregation by location revealed an employment to population ratio of 71.1% in urban areas and 80.7% in rural areas. Informal employment in Nigeria and other developing countries seems to be very high when compared to the developed countries, and the jobless rate among young people aged 15 to 24 rose to 8.6% from 7.2%, and unemployment in the urban areas also increased marginally to 6% from 5.9% in the previous quarter. It's a state of observation, and let's see if we can get Mr. Dr. Aliyu joins the conversation now. Dr. Aliyu, we're talking about food insecurity in the country. And one of those outlook when you talk about purchasing power and insecurity in the country would be from basic understanding for many would be from the angle where you look at security of farmers. But one other concern, because Nigeria predominantly gets to import into the country, I was asking this, if we have in Nigeria enough food to meet the needs of Nigeria.
Now, the question, like I said earlier, I do not even think we are amplifying scarcity of food more than purchasing power. Okay. Because if you ask me now, people want to actually purchase food. There is food in the market, but the purchasing power to buy that food is now the problem. Yeah. Now, we could say to an extent we have been experiencing farmer problem whereby people have to pay toll to even access their farm, whereby the insecurity insurgency have taken them away. But the present problem we are having is the problem of purchasing power. Because assuming we don't have sufficient food, government can decide that let us import some food. If at all we want to have food sufficiency, But the problem now is purchasing power. If you go to the market with 200,000 naira to purchase food item, I'm sure you know how, in fact, it will be like a 2-bag that you bring home that is not enough. So it's a serious problem in as much as we are encouraging all-round farming. We are also encouraging food sufficiency in Nigeria. The current problem is more of purchasing power, where naira has got depreciated to a level that you cannot buy things for you in the market. Imagine a loaf of bread at 1,400, So imagine that level of low purchasing power. That's just the major problem. Then for farming, you recall that President Muhammadu Buhari actually carried out what we call anchor borrower. And in the area of rice, we said we want to have food sufficiency. I think they have done well to an extent, if not for flood and bad policy that erode the advantage that we were taking. And that's why we also have issues with CBN, because there's some intervention that is not supposed to be CBN directly intervening in those farm issues, but they have intervened. So these are the way we actually get it wrong. But for now, I think our major problem is that purchasing power is even much more than availability of food in the market.
Well, I begin to ask one question regarding purchasing power, because you've hammered on it, talking about purchasing power. Many Nigerians might just wonder what really went wrong that Naira gets this weak at this point, because there were many promises that came. And by the way, you also get to tell us how this works in tandem with the unemployment rate that's increasing in the country. But on the other hand, what is the biggest problem of the Naira in the global market?
All right, thank you. The biggest problem of the Naira is the policy of government, which is policy of floating of Naira. Before we used to have different window, right? And that window, people access it to really get much more fun. But now, you said a willing buyer and a willing seller. That now gives strength to BDC. And by the way, government have approved over 5,000 DDC. Is that not a problem? I have traveled around in some Africa and some Western countries. If you want to exchange currency, they will ask for your international passport. They will ask for your details, and they will have reasons why you want to exchange such currency. But in Nigeria, it's like a common business, especially now here in Abuja. When you go to Zone 4, it is not news to you also that EFCC came to Zone 4, where the Bureau they change states and come and arrest some of them. It's because we have allowed this BDC to really take over a lot of things that is supposed to be responsibility of CBN. And such is that 5,000 BDC is too much to be licensed. I don't know why we cannot be okay with 500 BDC. This 500 BDC will be controlled. You can monitor them. You can check what they do daily. And there should be a record of how much transaction they do daily. That's by then, if you have people's passport and that for them to collect people's passport in other climes, that shows that they are monitoring who exchange money and why. Because by the time they collect your passport, they would have noticed you came into their country so period, and that's why you need to collect a dollar, or why that's why you are changing dollar to their currency. So these are the problems. So I think the policy itself is a problem. And you record also that Buhari also came up with this policy in 2017. But when he saw that it is not working, he withdrew it within a month or so. So I don't think it's too much also to withdraw such a policy itself.
Right, categorically, when you talk about these policies now, we're looking at the floating of the naira is what you're referring to. And on the other hand, when you look at the floating of the naira, the idea that happened before now was certain amount of money was put into the naira in the market anyway to stabilize the naira and keep naira at a particular peg. Before now it was at 400 and something naira to the dollar, and government kept pumping money into the currency market. But the next administration came, Bola Tinubu, and they said, let's float the naira, have a common exchange rate, and naira has been falling. But once in a while, we get to see the government put certain amounts of money back into the market to stabilize the naira just for a while. At the end of it, maybe after a week, we now see the naira falling. What I want to look at is this now. So far, it seems like a dooming situation because each time the pump in money into the market, it seems to make the naira appreciate for a little while. Afterwards, it crashes. What is the way forward now? Are we in some sort of roller coaster ride where we're beginning to see the naira just slump and slump and slump? You talked about withdrawal of the policy. How is this going to be?
Right. If you ask me, now the problem we have now is the supply side of dollar to Nigeria. So if I can tell you now, there is need for us to build our foreign reserve because that's our strength before now, which should be in dollar. That would have helped us. We also have demand issue. If you look at Nigeria now, everybody is demanding for dollar because you know why? It is a store of value. People now think if you have naira, your money doesn't have value. But by the time they have dollar, they save dollar. So what we need to do, number one, is that all our uh, sales, Nigerian sales now, should be requested that they should pay us in dollar, be it in mining sector, be in our oil, they should pay us in dollar. Why internally, we should also control and correct our the level at which we demand for dollars. Internally, some schools also demand that you should pay your school fee in dollar, which is very, very bad. So we must transact internally with naira, while we transact externally, we also collect a dollar. I think that's part of the way to actually solve the problem. However, going forward now, Nigeria government must be deliberate in its policy to make sure that there is less demand for dollar. And also, a good example is that if you look at the number of people that are traveling out of Nigeria, remember those people also demand for dollar that they want to use to travel. So these are all of the problems that we have. Then also, was it this morning that Binance and other platforms that are dealing with Naira, government also said they crash it, and that's why we see little. But for me, I can tell you, it's still a temporary measure. The major thing is that we must assess our crude and collect money in dollar. We must also control this BDC. 5,000 BDC is way too much for Nigeria. We just have to bring up some policy. Maybe they should have what we call some money with CBN before they can operate. So you can increase the money, just like when you are saying bankers should recapitalize. So this BDC, you can say they should recapitalize or capitalize so that you can use that to control them. If not, you will continue to see this problem going forward.
All right, Dr. Aliyu Elias, thank you Thank you very much for your thought. You've really talked about the CBD and broader change exchanges and what they've brought to the table and how they affected the entire system. Partly talking about 5,000 of them being too much. Well, it's a conversation. We'll also look at what potentially could be done. By the way, I have another guest who also give me a perspective regarding this conversation, Mr. Abel Udi, a banker. He joins the conversation now, an economist in that regard, a chartered accountant in that regard. Mr. Abel Udi, good evening. Welcome to the conversation. Welcome to the show. It's Business 401.
Good evening, Biden. Sorry I joined behind schedule. I had a meeting at the office and we just concluded. So I really have to apologize for joining the meeting behind schedule.
No problem. Let's get to the take of the conversation straight ahead. Dr. Aliyu has mentioned some of the concerns that's happening affecting the economy. And he talked about food insecurity in the country and talking about food and looked at the purchasing power of Nigerians. Now, inflation has gotten very high. And one of those conversations from IMF has been this now. IMFs have projected that Nigeria's economy would fall or weaken even further. And they project that inflation could reach 44% in the coming days, in the coming month. And it's quite scary because right now it's 29.9% and it's just difficult for Nigerians. They've also projected the Naira to fall even further by 35%. A big concerns there. But what I want you to have a chip on would be now looking at the policies of the federal government so far. Floating of the Naira, we've had this conversation before. Where are we getting it wrong? Because each time you get to hear that the federal government are doing some form of intervention on the Naira, and Naira appreciates for about a week. Afterwards, it slumps.
Now, the issue is about demand and supply for the dollar. Now, if the government decides to float the Naira, we should know that there's nowhere in the world where a CBN, absolutely leaves its currency to the forces of demand and supply. There are still some interventions, except maybe the United States of America, whose currency, of course, is the currency for international trade. If you look at China, for instance, China intervenes in its currency. China deliberately devalues its currency so that it can sell its product in the international market. I think for me, I have this understanding that Nigeria does not have the capacity to defend the Naira. However, I feel what the CBN ought to have done is the fact that, look, we need to cut some avenues, some demand side of our dollar. For instance, I don't believe that the CBN should fund PTA, for instance. I don't believe the CBN should fund school fees payment, for instance. I don't feel the CBN should fund mortgage payments, for people who have residential buildings in the US and in the UK, for instance, that they need to remit every year. And you and I should, if we look back at 1999 when President Obasanjo took office, after a while, about 2 or 3 years after, he introduced some 43 items that were on the sanction list for FX prohibition. For instance, I feel that list should be expanded to, let's say, 70 currently, so that for products that are not actually very, very important to our economy, CBN should not provide USD for them. While there should be targeted provision of FX to specific aspects of our economy that have direct impact on the purchasing power of the people. For instance, I think for fuel importation, diesel, PMS, kerosene, cooking gas importation into the country, there should be a specific rate, such that the people can enjoy some form of subsidy there. For industrial chemicals, heavy duty equipment, you could actually have a targeted interest rate for them. That way, though you are subsidizing the economy, yes, that you will still be able to sustain the purchasing power of the people and run the economy. What the president did when he came into power was to remove subsidy, petroleum subsidy, and also remove FX subsidy. Like I mentioned in a previous conversation I had on one of your shows this week, I said the issue of floating of the Naira takes me back to the issue of, let's say last year you could buy an Android phone for 120,000 Naira, which was maybe the equivalent of $300. But today, that Android phone is about, let's say, 320,000 naira. What it means is that the actual value of that phone is 320. But last year you paid 120 for it, and because government was providing a subsidy, government provided you a 400,000 naira subsidy. That is what a lot of us Nigerians are enjoying. That we were never cognizant of. And the truth is, we could not continue on that trajectory. Between you and I, we can't continue on that trajectory because we have more pressing problems. There are no jobs.
Okay.
Our power infrastructure is down. Even our educational infrastructure is not there. But however, to regulate the economy, people must be able to buy. For industries to work, they must be able to produce, and you and I should be able to buy. But the moment the cost of input, which is dictated by the dollar, is on the rise every day, and the purchasing power of the people reduce, factories will begin to shut down, and we'll begin to have what we call a negative GDP growth. And right now, we are actually experiencing nominal GDP growth because people are still buying
All right.
smaller products at an exorbitant amount. So we have nominal GDP, but inflation is rising.
Okay.
And when you have inflation rising, unemployment increasing, we might be heading towards stagflation. And that becomes very, very difficult to get out of. So for me, I think the policy on floating of the naira, in as much as we've seen the repercussion that it's actually adversely affecting the economy. I think the CBN should look at targeted sectorial allocation of FX to key industries that will have immediate impact on the economy,
All right.
oil and gas, manufacturing.
Okay. Okay. That's where we're
Not a
going
total
to.
reversal of the policy.
All right. You give your thoughts. That's where we're going to. Thank you, Mr. Abel Udi. Dr. Liu, let's have the conversation now. You've heard Mr. Abel Udi talked about it, looking at the different aspects of the economy where it also faltered from his perspective. Recently, the CBN, or rather the central bank, not the central bank now, the government of Nigeria, came out to say that they need about $10 billion in order to support, of funds in order to support and keep the economy stable. Talking about the naira when I'm talking about the economy now. When I listen to the two of you, many Nigerians who are listening might have a tendency of fear, tension, because we've looked at it. You said the policies had not worked, somewhat, somehow, and it's declining. The concern is, what is the way forward? They said $10 billion is the solution if they have this fund. What are they going to do about it when they get the $10 billion? How is it going to solve the problem of the naira?
Right. Like I said, the Nigeria economy is nosediving simply because of the policy direction. Like I said, now for you to actually float your naira, which I don't think any country will want to leave its naira to willing buyer, its current rather to willing buyer, willing seller. There must be it must be a productive economy that actually have something to export. Now, the implication of all what is happening now is that the manufacturers are finding it difficult to even access fund to get, ordinarily, if you want to borrow money in banks now, it's discover that the inflation is very, very high. I would prefer as a businessman to even take my money to that bank instead of me investing into manufacturing sector. I also go and put my money in banks so that I will collect more inflation. And what's the implication of that? It will bring about unemployment. And when it gives us unemployment, it's in the long run bring our GDP down because our productivity will be down. You will recall that even the last quarter, you can see that service sector is even doing better than the agricultural sector and the industrial sector, which is the bad news because we should have this agricultural sector doing more, and that's what will bring employment. So for me, I think policy it's a major issue. So for me, I think it's not bad if we can bring back this policy and create a window, like he rightly said, create a window maybe for oil and gas, for manufacturing sector. You may not be funding people's education, through medical, but there's some critical thing that government must also come and intervene. You cannot, governments have reason to be in business so as to control and maybe make things actually work to favor the Nigerian citizens. So for me, I think it's a policy issue and it should be reviewed as soon as possible.
It's a policy issue and should be reviewed as soon as possible, according to Dr. Leo Elias. Dr. Lee Elias has given this perspective. Mr. Udi, I'm coming to you now, looking at the narrative we've had before we go on a quick break that will go on. Well, the federal government have said $10 billion is the fund to change the narrative for the Naira crisis. How they're going to go about that, we do not know. Maybe you have an idea how they can go about that. Maybe you can tell us that.
Yeah, Blyden, I think 10 billion would just be a short-term solution to a long-term problem. Remember, we discussed the issue of when Nigeria had to do a forward contract with Afro-Exim Bank for $3 billion to stabilize the market. The money came and the money left. And we still have the demand pool on the dollar, which is leading to the fall of the Naira every day. And the truth is, Mr. Cardozo scrapped the 43 list of items not valid for FX. So he opened the demand. He opened more windows for exit when we had a supply problem. So I think if we bring in $10 billion into the market today, what will happen is that people will speculate on the FX. Right now, people are actually speculating. People in the middle class today are actually saving in USD. Businesses are raising fictitious pro forma invoices to just get their savings out of the country. You understand? So even if $10 billion enters into the market today,
out of fear, what you're saying is out of fear and a reaction, Nigerians also are encouraging or weakening the Naira.
Yeah, the speculation actually is weakening the Naira, you understand? And also, the removal of those 43 items not valid for FX, removal of that cap, and making FX an all-commerce affair at the CBN is actually counter.
Mr. Udi Ebel had been talking about how counterproductive it is regarding our policies and speculation from Nigerians equally having an impact on it. Dr. Aliyu, let's have the conversation now. One area I want us to drive into would be that of cement in the country. The prices of cement have gotten to a heightened level. In recent times, according to multiple reports, the price of cement had gotten to 10,000 naira for a bag of cement and 15,000 naira, 10,000 for, I think, Bois cement. And when you talk about Dangote cement, about 15,000 naira at a time. And recently, the federal government had to go into a meeting with manufacturers of this commodity cement. And they're trying to pick the price of the cement at 7,000 and 8,000 naira respectively for each of these manufacturers. What do you make of it? Because the price went up astronomically. Looking at it, just last year, ending of last year, it was at 5,500 when we were hearing that Bois Cement is intending to reduce the price of cement speculatively to 3,300. And many Nigerians were quite excited. Barely, how many months? The price has skyrocketed. How many percent? More than 5%. More than, not 5%, more than about 50% thereabout.
Right. If you look at the issue of cement, I think it's a very big issue that we should look at. Now, they are not living in another climate. They are also living in Nigeria. So for me, I think I expect it to go up because the cost of transportation is one. And also, they will also tell you that the assets are FX to also carry out their businesses. And that's the implication of floating of Naira and also removal of software subsidy. Because once you embark on this policy, majority of this manufacturer also need to assess this FX, also need to transport their goods and services. So consequently, it bring about increments in the cost of what they are doing. So I think when they went to the meeting with the manufacturer, the manufacturer now give federal government condition also before they can actually reduce the price to 7,000 or 8,000. But my issue in that area is that Nigeria should start encouraging competition because that's another problem we are suffering in the area of cement manufacturing. Because if you remember, we used to have Ibeto Cement, Boham, and a whole lot of them. But at a point, we began to see that Dangote keep buying all this cement company, and now we now have a cartel. Because tell me, it is still a cartel that will now have their meetings and say that this is our benchmark, and we don't want to move. So I think federal government should encourage competition in that area. Federal government can, even for now, I can tell you vividly, if they open border for cement to be imported into Nigeria, Dangote and Dua cannot sell at that level. So we should start encouraging competition in those sectors. I think that is our major problem.
Thank you, Dr. Leo. Let's get to talk to Mr. Abel Udi. He was sharing a conversation about the dollar and the naira, and part of that conversation was building on the potentiality of the $10 billion which the federal government have said they want $10 billion fund to change the narrative for the naira, or strengthen the naira. Mr. Abel Udi, continue your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm back. Okay, I think for me, I think, like I said, it's a short-term solution to a long-term problem, and $10 billion will be insufficient to stabilize the market on the long term, because right now we don't even have the capacity to attract $10 billion in either FDI or FPI. So I think it's not a solution that will work on the long term. For us, I agree with Dr. Ilya is that, look, we should have targeted allocation of FX to specific industries. We should address the issue of oil theft, because oil theft has actually reduced what comes into the government coffers. We should also look at checking excesses in governance. If we can check all of this, we will be able to manage on the short term while we improve our productivity. Because if we don't do this, we might have issues. And also, if there's a need to incentivize Dangote refinery to produce refined petroleum products for Nigeria, maybe it should buy FX, it should buy crude oil in Naira, credit CBN, Naira equivalent of the crude oil it needs to buy, and produce for us locally, so as to reduce the outward flow of FX. That way, we might be able to manage ourselves.
There's
but if we want
flow
to continue
of the
on the
dollars,
line,
right? That's what you mean. The outward flow of the dollars.
If you can reduce the outward flow of the dollar, and maybe restrict the outward flow to specific industries, you understand? And if need be, I think the the National Council on Privatization should speed up the process of selling the 3 refineries Nigeria has to serious businessmen who can do business in Nigeria, refine petroleum products in Nigeria, and sell to Nigerians. That way, if we look at the share of our FX that goes to importation of refined petroleum products, it's about 40 to 50%. So if we can reduce that by half, you understand, the pressure on the naira will reduce. And also, like I said, expand the list of items not valid for FX. That way we'll be able to manage our economy. We cannot, the Nigerian people cannot continue to subsidize the rich, you understand, at the expense of the poor. Because it is not you and I, Blyden, that send our children to school abroad. It is not you and I that have mortgage bills to pay abroad. It is not you and I that access $2,000 every quarter to travel to Europe and America. I think that way, if we can cut all those wastages, we might be able to reduce the pressure on the naira. If we want to sustain the current trend and think that a 10 billion windfall will come into the country and stabilize the dollar, I don't think it will, because speculators will grab it. Because right now, speculation is actually fueling, it's part of the issues fueling the depreciation of the naira.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Udi Ebel. Fantastic ideas there. Looking at the naira, many if we get to do this, if we get to do this, if we get to do that, if we get to do that, it's been quite difficult for Nigerians. And what Nigerians are looking forward to is just for things to be okay, the economy to be strong, and they move forward with their lives. Well, we'll go on a quick break. When we're back, we'll be looking at CBN's recent increases regarding FX rate, exchange rate for cargo clearances. We hear it's at 1,605 naira per dollar. What is paid to clear cargoes at the wharf? A big concerns and the Nigerian government are talking about the pledge to provide 100,000 jobs by May 29th. It's a conversation we'll have when we return from this break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. It is Business 101, and my name is Bladder Kim. Looking at the state of Nigeria's economy, what are the pitfalls? What are the weaknesses? What are the growth levels? Recently, we saw the GDP growth, especially for the fourth quarter of 2023, improving to the shock of many analysts. On the other hand, on a year-on-year basis, annually, there was a struggle in there, not at the level it's supposed to be for the GDP. But let's talk about one talking point. My guests are still around, Mr. Abel Udi and Dr. Aliyu Elias. Being around, have been giving their ideas regarding this conversation. Let's get straight into the conversation. The CBN recently gave an idea, FX rates increasing astronomically. The seat increase in 2024, and the increase has been that for cargo clearance and reaching 1,605 naira per $1. Dr. Aliyu, let's have this conversation now. In 2024, it's been that of instability regarding cargo clearance in Nigeria. In fact, the exchange rate has been increasing step by step. This year, it has increased 6 massive times. How does this play out in terms of cost of commodity and the economy?
Right. I think this is a problem in terms of priority. I think government, we always canvass for ease of doing business. We canvass for foreign direct investment, but the government continue to stifle this area instead of them to give them a better opportunity. You know, if you recall, I made mention of supply chain, and our port is a good example of it. So now that you have increased the rate at which people can clear cargo, what does that mean? A Toyota Corolla that is supposed to be going for 4 million naira is now going to go for 10 million naira. That is just the analysis. So goods and services that are coming from abroad are supposed to be affordable. It becomes much more. And that's why we talk about policy. Now, we always look at fiscal policy, we always look at monetary policy. We are not looking at our trade policy. So our trade policy is a major problem, and it is only a precursor for balance of payments and balance of trade. Until we look at that very, very well, we'll find it difficult to really attain the development that we want. So look at this example now. Instead of you to create more avenue for a better business, you're now increasing a lot of things. Like Dr. Ibe rightly said, the challenge is that there are some items that you need to focus on. And that's a problem that we also need to address from our AFCT, the African Free Trade Continental, Free Continental Area. You know, you must come to terms that these are the commodity we want to bring into Nigeria. You increase the price of that, then you look at others, not that you just bring an arbitrary increment, and that's a big problem. So now things are becoming much more difficult for people to access. So it's a problem, and you want to attract diaspora to do business within Nigeria. So it's a serious problem that we need to address. I don't think we need such increment at this point in time.
Mr. Abel Udi, still within the terms of this conversation about cargo clearance in the country, you think it's a good thing from your standing, considering the fact that as the rate is getting higher, it's affecting exchanges with the dollars, and somewhat somehow maybe people begin to think inward instead of going outward, looking for importation? Mr. Abel Udi couldn't get us on that regard. Dr. Aliyu, let's still go through the conversation here and look at one other point of view. The Nigerian government have said they are about to create 100,000 jobs in the country come May 29th. And one of the potentiality of it is that they'll be partnering with Access Bank. And Access Bank, according to them, have set out about 50 billion naira for this, for SMMEs, small and medium scale businesses, enterprises in the country. And they're saying they'll be giving out loans at just 15%, considering it's lower than the current interest rates in the country from CBN. A good direction. First question would be, is it even possible for them to create 100,000 jobs at the set time, or is just another political conversation? And now looking at what they're about to do.
Right. I think it's very, very easy to create 100,000 jobs in Nigeria as well. First and foremost, you will recall that 85% of jobs in Nigeria are much more of MSME. You also agree with me that MSME also contributes above 50% to our GDP. So all what we need is enabling environment. We're talking about ease of doing business. If you create enabling environment for Nigerians, there will be uh, job creation. But my problem is that until we attain what is called energy security, if you can have energy security, I think from there, because this MSME you are creating job, and that's the problem in Nigeria. People will start business within 5 years, they're out of business. It's because the business climate is very, very difficult. You have to cope with the issue of energy security. You have to cope with the issue of providing electricity yourself. A lot of things, and the astronomical cost of managing things. So I think for Nigeria to create such job, there's need for them to be conscious to nurture this business beyond MSME to an industrial level. So I think it's possible. Depends on the policy and the plan behind it.
All right, depending on the quality and the plan behind it, and not just political talks as usual. Mr. Ebelude is back. Let's have the conversation now. Mr. Ebelude, before you went away because of connection issues, one conversation we had, that was that of FX rates and the clearances that's happened regarding for cargo clearance. And we hear it's been 6 times on the increase in Nigeria, what we're having from the CBN, that increasing the FX rate for cargo clearance, and current price is 1,605 naira per dollar. My question is now, we've talked about the naira and the difficulties of the naira in the market. Is it a good move as the exchange rate is changing for clearance of these commodities?
The truth is that the CBN is just responding to the market. You should know that tariffs are a function of the value of the items being imported. So if the market, is saying the naira is 1,600 naira or thereabout, you understand, the federal government will not shortchange itself by charging a lesser tariff.
Okay.
So what the CBN is actually doing is actually responding to the forces of demand and supply in its currency market. That's why it's upping the exchange rate for customs to 1,600. However, what I find funny and hypocritical about this policy is that CBN is going after Binance, as if Binance is actually manipulating the naira, so to say,
yeah,
and going after BDCs. However, at the former import and export exporter window, I&E window, the bids are as high as 1,700, and the fixed rate sometimes would now peg custom duties at 1,600. And we still come back to tell us that Binance, is manipulating currency when they're actually responding. A major revenue agency of the government is responding to the market and pegging naira at 1,605 naira for custom duties. So I think the federal government, by and large, should understand that the floating, is causing issues, in the market, and it's causing a lot of pain to Nigerians. And we should not try to window dress the issues. The issues is that we don't produce enough, and we are an import-dependent nation, and floating in naira is affecting the general population, and it is not actually the problem of Binance, because the difference between what Binance, is quoting and what the custom portal is quoting is negligible. That means the CBN actually knows that the true value of the naira is about 1,600 thereabout, and that is what they paid the CBN to. So Binance is not the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Ebel.
And like I said, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Ebel. We're quickly running out of time. The conversation gets very interesting and it spans across. We'll have the conversation some other time. But last words from you, Dr. Aliyu. Looking at Nigeria, one big concern we have would be that of public debt stock in the country, putting this side by side with what is happening in the economy. Let me ask this now. When you look at Nigeria's economy, a final word, just 30 seconds, where are we heading to? Is there any hope?
Right. There is hope, but this government must come with a short-term, medium-term, and long-term plan, because they are still working in vacuum. They are reactive instead of being proactive. So we expect Nigerian government to be proactive to the Nigerian economy.
All right. Mr. Abel Udi, final words from you now. Looking at the Nigerian economy, looking at how the government has responded in terms of policies so far, where are we going to?
Well, I think for now, the government should try to address the debt issues by restructuring all our foreign loans, to longer term tenor, and seeking for moratoriums where they can seek for moratoriums. I think they should, the ways and means borrowing from CBN, they should convert to bonds and sell to the public, and that way we can, federal government can free itself of interest payments and be able to focus on spending, focus on our fiscal policy and spend on the economy to grow the economy. Without that, we are in for a long ride.
Without that, we are in for a long ride. That's what I wanted to get. What happens next for Nigeria? Are we having any hope about the changes in the economy as soon as possible, or it's definitely going to be a long ride? Thank you, Mr. Abel Udi, for being a part of the conversation, and thank you, Dr. Aliyu, for being a part of the conversation.
Thank you for having me, Biden.
We hope to have you some other time.
Thank you so much.
Well, here we draw the curtain on today's edition of Business 101. Fascinating conversation regarding the economy. My name is Vladimir Kim. We're hopeful that things get to change and the federal government responds in true regards based on the principles stated out by my guest, looking at the state of the economy and the purchasing power of Nigerians. We can only hope and be hopeful. And here we say bye-bye. Thank you for being a part of it. We'll return next week for further conversation regarding the economy and business. Thank you for watching.